I mentioned earlier that there are 3 phases. There's a discovery phase, a research phase, and an editing phase. So let's move on to phase 1. We call it discovery. I guess the best way for you to think about it is pretend that you're doing a research project or a paper. And so we start with what the topic is. And the topic in this case is you and your student. And here's what we often see and what we don't want. And that is a 12th grade student will walk into our office and announce her intention of going pre-med in front of her parents, of course. And then she'll say, nah, pre-law. And then Peter might look at that student and say, so pre-med, you must like science. And the student says, no. And I'd say, well, how about research? You must like research. Nope. Peter would jump back in and say, you must love to read, right? Not especially. And then the two of us will look at each other and we say, okay, it's time to go back to the beginning because something in one of these phases wasn't addressed properly, and there's a mismatch between what the student is saying they want to do and what it is that they're actually enjoy doing and will likely be successful at. So the first step in any college process is going to have nothing to do with college. It's really about self-analysis. And it's really, to my mind, and I think, Peter, you'd agree with this, it's probably one of the bigger flaws with most of the college search tools that you're going to find online, including the ones that we use, although ours is developed slightly differently. We don't start this process by poring over information about class sizes or male to female ratios or student population demographics. That stuff comes later. We don't even want to mention the C word in this process. And that's especially true if you're talking to students who are in the younger grades, 8th, 9th, 10th grade. It's intimidating enough. We really want to start our children speaking about themselves. So the goal of this particular part of the process is to be able to learn and clearly be able to identify and define what exactly you're looking for. That's you as the parent and he or she as the student, because then you can go out and only then, and you can figure out where that is offered, and if you do that, then your child is likely to thrive in that environment, and that's the goal, right, to make them thrive and to be able to afford to do so. And if they thrive, it'll be less expensive in the end. So we start with you. Let's talk about you for a second, and by you I mean parents. So if there are some students who at their lunch hour are listening in, right now I'm talking about mom and dad. And for you, we start with numbers. What's your budget? What can you afford? And from that, I mean, what can you afford from your monthly cash flow? The reality is that we all knew when we had children that they were going to probably go to college someday. So really, the realistic answer is not nothing, because college is not like public elementary, middle, or high school. There is a fee at this point for college in some sort. And so you have some number in mind that you know that you can afford, and whether that's out of your own cash flow, savings, or anything else. So that's where we start. And then we move, and Peter's going to get really into cost and what you can afford very shortly in this chat. The second thing we want you to be honest with, and this is if you're married, between you and your spouse, if you're separated or divorced rather, it's something you have to try and come to a meeting of the minds if you can, and that's about your values. And this is where we have to get real honest with ourselves. Be honest. I mean, do you want, in your heart of hearts, were you expecting, hoping, wishing, praying that your child would go to a certain school? Is it your alma mater? Is it something that you thought was always prestigious that you wanted to go to and couldn't go to? You have to know what your assumptions are and your prejudices are right up front, and you have to address those assumptions and determine if they're correct and appropriate for your child. And you have to have that discussion with yourself honestly. Some other things that come up, are you ready for them to leave home? Do you think they're ready? How far can they go? And just a personal anecdote, I was fortunate enough to grow up in the Northeast in the sense that within a 4-hour driving distance from where I was growing up, there were literally 1,000 colleges. My parents drew a circle in that radius and said anywhere we can get to in 4 hours is where you can go to college. It's not the case for everybody. So are you okay with the hassle and perhaps the expense of a long distance travel? Is weather going to be important? And then we move on to them. And after you've had that, so you know what your expectations are, then you start to think about your student. And the goal here is you're going to have to get your child to talk about him or herself. And we're not delusional. We have children, and we've been working with kids. Well, gosh, Peter's been working with kids since he was a kid and had to grow a beard to teach high school. And I've been working with kids for at least a decade now, and we're not delusional. We know that very few high school kids know right from the get-go that they want something, and they are very specific about what that is. And that is perfectly understandable, acceptable, and frankly to be expected. So do not expect your child to be forthcoming with exactly what it is that they want to talk about. So what we like to use as communication techniques and some of the strategies that we use that works in our own practice focuses on the type of things that they like to do. We call it, and this is taken from local radio, toes, what makes their toes tingle, and what's the stuff that bores them to tears, because often that gives us a little bit of a window, an insight into what they're really thinking about. For example, if you ask or know which teachers your child either hates or likes, and you understand why, then what you're really getting at is how does that student learn best. You don't say, how do you like to learn, because no student can really answer that, but you'll get a sense based on talking about what kinds of teachers they tend to gravitate towards and why. What classes are they enjoying and why? Same thing. You're getting at what's really making them happy. And purpose is going to be a very important part of the entire college getting into and being successful in college is going to college purposeful. And we start that early on in the high school experience, is to start to train people to think of college not as 13th grade but as an intentional endeavor. And so we start with this deliberate analysis. And what we find out is that, and this is especially so parents of some of the students who are younger, it is really overwhelming to ask a student, and probably even to ask some of us, what do you want to do with your life? Or where do you want to go to college? Can even become very intimidating. Anything with the C word, career or college. We teach parents not to speak that way in this phase because it's just too soon and it tends to make people shut down. We teach our students, and this is a helpful technique for you, when someone asks them, where do you want to go to college? We teach our students to reply with, that's a great question, I'm trying to figure that out. Where did you go to college? Can you tell me about your experience? That helps them turn the conversation around, and most of the time when people ask, that's really what they want to talk about. Same thing goes for what do you want to do with your life. If someone asks you our children what they want to do when they grow up, it's very helpful to say, I'm still deciding, I'm trying to understand different careers. What do you do? Why did you choose that, and do you like it? And what do you like about it? So these are questions we teach our children to ask. So as parents, you can help them in that process. Instead, we like to get them talking about what they're good at. And I'll be very, very honest with you. Frankly, it's easier to start with what bugs them. Children open up much faster when you start talking about what they don't like, and then they get to what they're good at and what makes them feel energized. Energy is a good way as a parent to identify where your students' interests lie. You can see a student's eyes light up, and you can feel the energy. But where do they gravitate towards when you're not looking? What's the first thing they tackle in their homework? That'll give you hints as to where they are. And then you can start assessing their strengths, etc. One of the other things we caution parents is, and we're all guilty of it as parents, is we tend to project. So it's very hard, but we try not to speak about what it is that you did or liked or didn't like unless you're specifically asked, because it is so different. The first thing you'll get is a complete shutdown from your child, because they will say, and they are correct, this process is nothing like it was when you went to school. And it's not. There is not a chance. Peter and I are heading up to our 25-year college reunion. We assessed all of our friends who we're meeting with, and we did some of our own analysis on them, and not a single one of us probably would have gotten accepted to that school under today's circumstances. So it's different today. So be mindful of that as you go into them. And remember, we play an important role as parents, but a supporting role. They, not we. We can always know when we've overstepped when we say we. They are going to college. We are not. We are, however, going to be supporting them probably financially. So it is a lifelong venture, and it makes most sense to make sure that the fit is perfect. The other thing is, don't rush through this process. Even if you are on this call and you have an 11th grader or even a 12th grader, again, going back to the first story, it's about how you start that will determine how you finish. I know that we live in a soundbite, 140-character world. There is an ability and a desire by all of us to get the easy answers, but when it comes to the college search, it's not about a ranking or an easy answer or the 5 schools that you know of. Take the time to go through this phase and really do some analysis here. It will pay dividends, and I mean that I mean that literally, and I mean that spiritually in the end.